The observation deck of the UES Defiance hummed with the subdued energy of a ship that had seen too much war and not enough home. Captain James Holloway stood before the reinforced viewport, his weathered hands clasped behind his back, watching the debris field of what had once been the Terran colony of New Brisbane drift past in deadly silence. Twisted metal caught the light of the system's dying star, creating a macabre light show that would have been beautiful if it weren't so damned tragic. 43,000 souls, came the voice behind him, rough, tinged with the kind of exhaustion that sleep couldn't cure. Commander Rachel Torres stepped up beside him, her dark eyes reflecting the same haunted expression that had become commonplace among the human fleet. Families, children, all of them gone in less than 6 hours. Holloway's jaw tightened. 6 months ago, the Zephyrian hegemony had arrived at New Brisbane with their sleek, crystalline warships and their ultimatum: submit to the consortium's rule, or face extinction. The colonists had requested 3 days to consider. They'd been given 3 minutes. The consortium calls it cleansing. Torres continued, her voice barely above a whisper. They say we're a contamination, a plague that spreads violence wherever we go. She gestured toward the debris field. Apparently, the cure is genocide. The captain remained silent. What was there to say? For 2 years, humanity had been fighting a war they couldn't win against an alliance of species so technologically superior that human victories were measured in minutes survived rather than battles won. Earth's colonies were falling one by one, each loss a dagger to the heart of human civilization. The lucky ones were enslaved. The unlucky ones became debris fields like this one. "Sir," called Lieutenant Jackson from the communications station, his young face pale with whatever message he'd just received. Priority transmission from Admiral Chen's flagship. On screen, the main display flickered to life, revealing the stern features of Admiral David Chen, commander of the 3rd Human Fleet, or what remained of it. Behind him, the bridge of the UES Retribution showed signs of recent battle damage, exposed conduits, emergency lighting, and the kind of barely contained chaos that came with fighting a war against impossible odds. "Jim," Chen's voice carried the weight of a man who'd watched too many good people die. "We've received intelligence from our friends in the underground. The consortium is planning something big. Final phase big." Holloway felt his blood turn to ice. The underground, a loose network of enslaved humans and sympathetic aliens who fed information to the Terran resistance, rarely passed along good news. When they used phrases like final phase, it usually meant someone was about to die. A lot of someones. "Details, Admiral." Chen's expression darkened. "Operation Silence. 3 weeks from now, simultaneous strikes against every remaining human settlement in consortium space. Not just military targets, Jim. Everything. Every colony, every outpost, every ship. They're calling it the final solution to the human problem." The bridge fell silent, except for the soft hum of life support systems. Holloway could hear his own heartbeat in his ears. "Estimated casualties. Best guess, 7 billion. Chen's voice cracked slightly. "That's everyone, Jim. Everyone we've got left. 7 billion. The number sat in Holloway's stomach like a lead weight. 7 billion people, all that remained of humanity's vast diaspora, marked for death by an alien alliance that saw them as nothing more than a persistent infection to be cauterized from the galaxy. "There's more," Chen continued. "The underground managed to intercept part of a Zephyrian communique. Something about a demonstration of resolve before the main operation. They're planning to hit something soon. Something that will..." He paused, searching for words. "Something that will clarify the futility of human resistance for the rest of the galaxy." Torres stepped forward. "Sir, with respect, we've heard this before. The consortium has been making examples of us for 2 years. What makes this different?" Chen's expression grew haunted. "Because this time they're not just targeting military installations or remote colonies. Intelligence suggests they're going after one of the sanctuary worlds." The bottom dropped out of Holloway's world. Sanctuary worlds. Neutral systems where human refugees and non-combatants had gathered under supposed consortium protection. Places where children played in safe courtyards and old men sat in the sun, believing themselves beyond the reach of the war. If the consortium was willing to break their own treaties and slaughter civilians. Which one? Holloway's voice came out as a rasp. We don't know. But Jim, Chen leaned forward, his eyes boring into the screen. If we can't stop this demonstration, if they succeed in breaking the sanctuary accords, then Operation Silence becomes inevitable. No one in the galaxy will lift a finger to help us after that. We'll be alone, completely alone. The transmission cut out, leaving the bridge in oppressive silence. Holloway stared at the blank screen, his mind racing. Somewhere out there in the vast darkness of space, alien minds were planning the systematic extinction of his entire species. And here he stood, captain of a single damaged cruiser, watching debris fields and wondering if there was anything at all that could turn the tide of an unwinnable war. Captain, Lieutenant Jackson's voice was barely above a whisper. We're receiving a distress signal. It's not from any human vessel. Holloway turned, his eyes narrowing. Identify the source. Jackson's fingers danced across his console, his young face creased with confusion. Sir, it's coming from the inner system, near the fourth planet. The signal it's in standard galactic, but the encryption is something I've never seen before. And he looked up, his eyes wide with disbelief. It's being broadcast on the emergency frequencies reserved for children. The captain felt something cold crawl down his spine. In consortium space, child distress signals were sacred. In Velia, no military force, human or alien, would dare interfere with such a transmission without facing the combined wrath of a dozen species. It was one of the few universal laws that even the war-drunk Zephyrians respected. Can you clean up the signal? Get us audio? Already working on it, sir. Jackson's hands flew across his console, and slowly the bridge's speakers began to emit a sound that made every human present feel something die inside their chests. It was crying, the broken, desperate sobbing of a child in mortal terror. But underneath the tears, spoken in the precise musical tones of standard galactic, came words that would haunt Holloway's dreams for the rest of his life. Please, someone help me. They killed my family. They killed everyone. I'm alone. I'm so scared. Please, if anyone can hear this, I don't want to die alone. The transmission cut to static, leaving the bridge in absolute silence. Torres was the first to speak, her voice barely a whisper. Jesus Christ! Holloway stared at the communication station, his mind reeling. A child, somewhere in this godforsaken system. An alien child was broadcasting a plea for help on frequencies that should have brought a dozen rescue ships running. But there were no rescue ships. There was only the debris field of New Brisbane, the dying star, and a single human cruiser, whose crew had been taught since birth that all aliens were their enemies. Sir, Jackson's voice was tight with emotion. The signal originated from Tau Ceti 4th. Long-range scans show, sir, there's been orbital bombardment. Recent. The planet's surface is still glowing in infrared. Another massacre. Another world burned clean by consortium justice. But this time someone had survived long enough to scream into the void. Someone small. Someone afraid. Someone who might still be alive. Options, Commander Torres. Torres pulled up a tactical display on her tablet, her professional mask slipping back into place despite the tremor in her hands. Tau Ceti Vir Theta is deep in Zephyrian patrol space. Getting there would require running a gauntlet of at least 3 patrol groups. Coming back. She shook her head. Sir, it would be a suicide mission. We have no idea what we'd be walking into, and even if we found this child alive, we'd never make it back to friendly space. Holloway nodded slowly. Everything Torres said was true. Tau Ceti 4th was a death trap. Going there would accomplish nothing except adding the Defiance and her crew to the growing list of human casualties. It would be illogical, tactically unsound, a waste of resources that humanity could ill afford. It would also be the right thing to do. The captain turned back to the viewport, where the debris of New Brisbane continued its silent dance among the stars. Somewhere out there, Operation Silence was being planned. Somewhere out there, 7 billion human lives hung in the balance. And somewhere closer, on a burned world orbiting a dying star, a child was waiting for someone, anyone, to answer their cry for help. Lieutenant Jackson, Holloway said quietly, plot a course for Tau Ceti 4th. Maximum stealth approach. Sir? Torres stepped forward, her eyes wide. Captain? You can't be serious. The tactical situation. Commander, Holloway's voice carried the quiet authority of a man who'd made his choice and would live or die with the consequences. In 2 years of war, we've learned that the consortium sees us as monsters, as a plague to be cleansed from the galaxy. Maybe they're right. Maybe we are violent. Maybe we are dangerous. He turned to face his crew, his eyes blazing with something that might have been hope or might have been madness. But we're also the only ones left who remember that mercy matters, that protecting the innocent isn't negotiable, that some things are worth dying for. He walked toward the command chair, his voice growing stronger with each word. If we're going to be judged by the galaxy, let's make sure they judge us for who we really are. Not the monsters the consortium claims we are, but the people who hear a child crying in the dark and answer. The bridge crew exchanged glances. They all knew it was suicide. They all knew the odds. But as Lieutenant Jackson's fingers began plotting their course to hell, as Commander Torres started calculating ammunition loads and shield frequencies, as the UES Defiance slowly turned away from the debris field of New Brisbane and toward the uncertain darkness ahead, something flickered in the air around them. Something that felt suspiciously like hope. Behind them, the dying star cast long shadows across the remains of 43,000 dreams. Ahead of them, 3 patrol groups of Zephyrian warships prowled the space lanes like hungry predators, and somewhere beyond that, on a world that glowed with the aftermath of genocide, a single voice continued to call into the void. Please, someone help me. The UES Defiance accelerated into the darkness, carrying with her a cargo more precious than any treasure in the galaxy. The last, desperate hope that in a universe gone mad with conquest and cruelty, mercy might still mean something. That humanity might still mean something. The war was far from over, but for the first time in 2 years the humans were the ones setting the terms of engagement. And somewhere in the deep black, the Zephyrian patrol ships registered the approach of a single human cruiser and began moving to intercept. They had no idea that they were about to encounter something far more dangerous than any weapon humanity had ever fielded. They were about to encounter human compassion in full flower. And in a galaxy that had forgotten the difference between strength and brutality, that made all the difference in the universe. There are moments in the history of any species when the universe holds its breath, when the choices of a few determine the fate of billions, when the echo of a single decision ripples across space and time, reshaping the very fabric of civilization itself. For the Zephyrian hegemony, that moment came when their patrol ships detected a lone human cruiser making an impossible course correction toward a dead world that should have held no interest for anyone. They were about to learn that humanity's greatest weapon was never their technology, their tactics, or their terrible capacity for violence. It was their refusal to look away when others suffered. High Admiral Carithlos stood in the command center of the dreadnought Eternal Silence, her crystalline form refracting the blue-white light of the ship's neural interface networks into patterns of cold beauty. Like all Zephyrians, she was a creature of living minerals, silicon and carbon woven into a consciousness that could survive in the vacuum of space as easily as in the depths of an ocean. Her species had evolved beyond the fragile flesh that limited so many others, achieving a kind of immortality that came with absolute clarity of purpose. That purpose for the last 2 years had been the systematic elimination of humanity from the galaxy. Status report, she commanded, her voice resonating through the ship's consciousness link with harmonics that spoke of absolute authority. Submander Zethrin stepped forward, his younger form still showing the rough edges that would eventually be polished into perfect geometric precision. The human vessel Defiance has altered course from the New Brisbane debris field. Current trajectory puts them on an intercept course with Tau Ceti 4. Carithlos felt something that might have been curiosity flicker through her consciousness matrix. Tau Ceti 4 had been cleansed 3 days ago, a minor operation to eliminate a pocket of mixed-species refugees who had been harboring human sympathizers. The planet was a radioactive wasteland now useful for nothing except as an example of what happened to those who showed mercy to the human infection. Tactical assessment. The human ship is running silent, but our deep scan networks detected them 6 hours ago. They are clearly attempting a stealth approach, though for what purpose? Zethrin's form flickered with uncertainty. Admiral, There is nothing of strategic value on Tau Ceti. The cleansing operation eliminated all life forms above bacterial level. Why would they risk a ship for a dead world? Korithlos moved to the tactical display, her consciousness interfacing directly with the ship's sensor arrays. The Defiance was indeed running dark, minimal emissions, reduced engine signature, complete communication silence. It was a textbook stealth approach, the kind humanity had perfected during their increasingly desperate resistance campaigns. But this made no sense. Tau Ceti IV was worthless. A cinder, a monument to the futility of opposing consortium. Analysis of human psychological patterns, she commanded. The ship's AI core, a vast network of quantum-linked Zephyrian minds, responded instantly. Human behavior demonstrates persistent illogical attachment to individuals over strategic objectives. Previous encounters suggest emotional decision-making overrides tactical considerations in 73% of documented cases. However, Captain James Holloway of the Defiance shows exceptional strategic thinking in prior engagements. This deviation from established patterns is anomalous. Korithlos studied the data streams flowing through her consciousness. Holloway was indeed an anomaly, one of the few human commanders who had managed to inflict significant casualties on consortium forces while preserving his own crew. His tactical record showed cold, calculating intelligence rather than the emotional volatility that characterized most human military leaders. So why was he throwing his ship away on a worthless rock? Sub-Commander, recall the events of the Tau Ceti IV cleansing operation. Zetherin's form shifted through spectrum analyses and tactical reports. Standard protocol, Admiral. Orbital bombardment eliminated all surface structures and most subsurface installations. Casualty estimates suggest 97% mortality within the first hour of bombardment. No survivors detected during final scans. No survivors, Korithlos repeated, her crystalline features reflecting the tactical display. But something nagged at her consciousness, a detail that didn't fit the pattern. The Censorin, who commanded the cleansing force. Wing Commander Velthar, Admiral. Korithlos felt a spike of something that might have been concern ripple through her consciousness matrix. The Velthar was competent, but young, ambitious. The kind of commander who might cut corners to achieve maximum efficiency ratings, pull the full operational report. The data flowed through her awareness like water through crystal channels, and what she found made her entire form resonate with harmonic discord. The cleansing operation had indeed been swift and thorough, but Velthar had terminated the final scanning phase 37 minutes early. His report cited complete sterilization confirmed and no further action required. But deep in the sensor logs, buried in automated subsystem reports that most commanders never bothered to review, was a single anomaly. A communication burst on child emergency frequencies, detected and logged by the ship's passive monitoring systems, but never investigated. The signal had lasted less than 12 seconds before atmospheric ionization from the bombardment cut it off. 12 seconds. Just long enough for a small voice to scream into the void. Admiral Zethrin's harmonic tone carried undertones of confusion. Your resonance patterns suggest distress. Korithlos stared at the data, her ancient consciousness processing implications that made her wish she were still capable of feeling horror. A child. There had been a child alive on Tau Ceti IV when they'd terminated the operation, and if the human ship was heading there now, it could only mean one thing. They had heard the call. Alert all patrol groups, she commanded, her voice cutting through the ship's consciousness link like a blade of ice. Intercept course for Tau Ceti IV, maximum priority. Admiral, respectfully, a single human cruiser poses no strategic threat to. You misunderstand the threat, Sub-Commander. Korithlos turned from the display, her crystalline form blazing with reflected light. If the humans reach Tau Ceti IV and find what I believe they will find, then everything changes. The consortium's moral authority, the galactic perception of the cleansing operations. Everything we have built in this war. Zethrin's harmonic confusion deepened. I do not understand, Admiral. A dead world. Perhaps a single survivor. How could this threaten the consortium? Korithlos moved to the great viewport that dominated the command center, gazing out at the stars that had witnessed 2 years of systematic human extermination. How could she explain to a young mind something that had taken her 3 centuries to understand? How could she convey the dangerous, illogical, absolutely incomprehensible thing that made humanity so persistently difficult to eliminate? Because, Submander, she said quietly, humans do not think like us. They do not calculate threat assessments or strategic value when they hear a child crying. They simply act, and when they act out of what they call compassion, they become something far more dangerous than mere warriors. She turned back to the tactical display, watching the icon representing the Defiance as it crept through space toward a world that should have been forgotten. They become martyrs. And martyrs, Zetherin, are the one weapon we have never learned to counter. Deep in the bowels of the UES Defiance, Chief Engineer Maria Santos wiped grease from her hands and stared at the power coupling that should have been replaced 6 months ago. Like everything else on the ship, it was holding together through a combination of determination, prayer, and the kind of mechanical ingenuity that came from 2 years of running repairs under combat conditions. "How we doing, Chief?" Commander Torsa's voice echoed down the maintenance shaft. "Oh, you know," Santos replied, wrestling with a coolant line that had developed an alarming tendency to spray plasma coolant at random intervals. "Same as always. Everything's broken, nothing works, and we're somehow still alive despite the laws of physics suggesting otherwise." Tarsus chuckled, but there was no humor in it. "Story of our lives, you get us to Tau Ceti 4. Santos paused in her work. They'd all heard the transmission. They'd all seen the captain's face when that broken little voice had whispered its plea into the darkness. Maria might have been the name on her birth certificate, but after 2 years of keeping this rust bucket flying through hell itself, the crew called her Miracle. And right now they needed every miracle she could manufacture. "Torres," she said carefully, "you know what we're flying into, right? 3 patrol groups, deep space, no backup, no extraction plan." She gestured at the jury-rigged systems surrounding them. "This ship is held together with spit and hope. We take one solid hit from a Zephyrian pulse cannon, and we're space dust." "I know. And you know what we're flying toward? A dead world. A world they glassed 3 days ago. Whatever that kid was when they called for help, they're probably gone by now. We could be throwing our lives away for nothing." Torres was quiet for a long moment, her breathing echoing softly in the maintenance shaft. When she spoke, her voice carried the weight of everything they'd lost, everything they'd seen, everything they'd learned about themselves in the crucible of an impossible war. "You ever have kids, Santos?" "No. Never seemed like the right time, you know? Always another deployment, another mission." Santos's hands stilled on the coolant line. "A daughter, Emma. She was 7 when the war started." The Torres's voice went soft. "I was on patrol duty when the consortium hit the Centauri colonies. By the time we got word, by the time we could mount a rescue operation, they were gone. All of them. 40 million people just gone." Santos felt something cold settle in her stomach. She'd never heard Torres talk about her family before. Most of them didn't. It hurt too much. "The official report said it was quick," Torres continued. "Orbital bombardment, they said. Clean? Efficient. No suffering." Her voice cracked slightly. "But I know better. I've seen the aftermath of their clean operations. And I keep thinking, in those final moments when the sky was falling and there was nowhere to run, did she call for help? Did my little girl cry out for someone to save her?" The maintenance shaft fell silent except for the distant hum of overtaxed engines pushing them toward what might be their deaths. "And if she did," Torres whispered, "would anyone have answered?" Santos closed her eyes, feeling the weight of 2 years settle on her shoulders like a lead blanket. All the lost worlds, all the dead colonies, all the voices that had cried out into the void and received nothing but silence in return. "This kid," she said finally, "on Tau Ceti 4. They might be dead already. Yeah, they might be. We might die trying to reach them. Yeah, we probably will." Santos looked up through the maintenance hatch, toward the bridge where Captain Holloway was guiding them, through the darkness toward what might be humanity's final act of defiance. "But we're going anyway." "Yeah, we're going anyway." Santos turned back to her work, her hands moving with practiced efficiency as she coaxed life from dying systems. Then we better make sure this bucket of bolts gets us there, because if there's even a chance, even the smallest possibility that someone's alive down there, then by God we're going to answer that call. Above them, the Defiance continued its silent journey through hostile space, carrying with it the hopes and dreams of a species that had learned to find strength in their compassion rather than weakness. Behind them, Cypherian warships were closing distance, their crystalline forms cutting through space with lethal grace. Ahead of them, a dead world waited in the darkness, its surface still glowing from the fires of genocide. And somewhere between the hunters and the hunted, between the living and the dead, between hope and despair, the fate of more than just one alien child hung in the balance. The war was about to take a turn that no tactical computer, human or alien, could have predicted, because for all their analysis of human psychological patterns, for all their understanding of human military capabilities, the consortium had never truly grasped the most dangerous thing about humanity. When they heard someone crying in the dark, they didn't stop to calculate the odds. They just came running. Velthar, wing commander of the 3rd Cleansing Fleet, stood in the medical bay of his command ship, staring down at the stasis pod that contained his greatest mistake. The child inside was small, even by the standards of her species, barely into adolescence, her scaled features still soft with youth. She should have been dead. According to every report he'd filed, every scan he'd certified, she was dead. But 3 hours ago, an automated medical drone had detected life signs emanating from a collapsed shelter in the ruins of Settlement 7. Weak life signs, fading life signs, but undeniably, impossibly, alive. Status report, he commanded, his voice carrying harmonics of barely controlled anxiety. Medical technician Hethrin looked up from her examination protocols, her insectoid features clicking with what might have been nervousness. The subject suffered severe radiation exposure during the bombardment. Thermal burns across 30% of her body, internal bleeding, multiple fractures. She paused, her compound eyes reflecting uncertainty. By all calculations, she should have died within the first hour of the attack. But she didn't. No, sir. She didn't. Her species' natural hibernation response appears to have slowed her metabolism to near-death levels. Combined with the shelter's minimal shielding, Ithrin's mandibles clicked thoughtfully. She survived, sir. Barely, but she survived. Velthar stared at the child, at the living proof of his operational failure. When Admiral Kallard Ethelos learned that a survivor had been recovered from Tau Ceti IV, his career would be over. Possibly his life as well. The consortium did not tolerate failure, especially failure that could compromise the moral authority of the cleansing operations. Treatment options. Full recovery is possible with proper medical intervention. The radiation damage can be reversed, the burns healed, the internal injuries repaired. Ithrin paused. However, sir, there is another consideration, which is, the child has been conscious intermittently since recovery. During her lucid periods, she has been communicating. Velthar felt his carapace prickle with alarm. Communicating how? Ithrin activated a holographic display showing communication logs from the medical bay's monitoring systems. Emergency frequencies, sir. Child distress protocols. She's been broadcasting a plea for help. The bottom dropped out of Velthar's world. A child survivor was a career-ending mistake. A child survivor broadcasting distress calls was a catastrophe that could unravel the entire consortium war effort. If word of this reached sympathetic species, if images of this child's suffering were disseminated across the galactic networks, how long has she been broadcasting? Since approximately 30 minutes after recovery, sir. We have attempted to block the transmissions. But her species appears to have a natural ability to modulate quantum frequencies. She is broadcasting directly through subspace. Velthar's mind raced through his options. He could terminate the child, claim she had died of her injuries despite medical intervention. It would solve the immediate problem. But if anyone had already detected her transmissions, or he could maintain the fiction that Tau Ceti IV had been completely sterilized, hope that no one had heard her calls, and pray that the child died naturally before anyone arrived to investigate. Both options felt like standing in the path of an avalanche, and hoping it would change course. Sir Hithrin's voice carried new urgency. I'm detecting multiple warp signatures approaching the system. Configuration suggests human vessel. The avalanche had arrived. Velthar moved to the tactical display, his consciousness interfacing with the ship's sensor arrays. 3 contacts, running silent but visible to their deep scan networks. The lead ship showed the distinctive energy signature of a human heavy cruiser, old, patched but still dangerous in the right hands. Identification? U.S. Defiance, sir. Captain James Holloway, commanding. Velthar had heard of Holloway, one of the few human commanders to consistently inflict casualties on consortium forces while preserving his own crew. A dangerous opponent under normal circumstances. But these weren't normal circumstances. The child in the medical bay changed everything. If Holloway had heard the distress calls, if he had come to investigate, then this wasn't just a military engagement. This was a race against time with the moral authority of the entire war hanging in the balance. Signal Admiral Kyrith, Los, Velthar commanded. Priority Alpha. Inform her that we have a Code Black situation developing in the Tau Ceti system. Code Black. The consortium's term for a scenario that could compromise the ideological foundations of their expansion. It was the kind of situation that ended careers, toppled governments, and reshaped the balance of power across the galaxy. It was the kind of situation that occurred when someone recorded images of consortium forces killing a child who had cried out for help, and no one answered. As the human ships continued their approach toward Tau Ceti 4th, as the child in the stasis pod continued her unconscious broadcasts into the void, as Admiral Kyrith Los's dreadnought accelerated toward a confrontation that could define the future of galactic civilization, one fact became crystalline clear. The war was no longer just about territory, resources, or strategic advantage. It was about the soul of the galaxy itself. And somewhere in the medical bay of a consortium cleansing vessel, a small alien child dreamed fevered dreams of rescue while her calls for help rippled through subspace, carrying with them a simple, terrible question that would echo across the stars. Who answers when the innocent cry out in the darkness? The surface of Tau Ceti 4 resembled nothing so much as a vision of hell rendered in glass and radiation. From the bridge of the UES Defiance, Captain Holloway watched the planet's Terminator line creep across continents that still glowed with the afterheat of orbital bombardment. Cities that had once housed millions had been transformed into geometric patterns of fused silicate. Forests had become fields of crystallized ash. Rivers had boiled away, leaving serpentine scars of radioactive minerals that painted the landscape in unnatural colors. Jesus, Lieutenant Jackson whispered, his young face pale in the reflected light of the dying world. They didn't just attack it. They murdered it. Holloway said nothing. What was there to say? This was consortium justice. Swift, absolute, and thorough enough to ensure that not even the memory of life could survive. But somewhere down there, against all odds and logic, someone had lived long enough to call for help. Passive scans detect no orbital defenses, Commander Torres reported, her voice carrying the professional detachment that came with 2 years of witnessing atrocities. No ships in orbit, no surface installations showing active power signatures. She paused, consulting her readings. Sir, the radiation levels are extreme. Even with full environmental suits, surface exposure would be lethal within 6 hours. What about the child? Torres worked through the calculations, her expression growing grimmer with each passing second. If they survive the initial bombardment, they're probably in some kind of underground shelter. But the radiation? She shook her head. Captain, even with natural species resistance, exposure at these levels would be fatal within days. If they're still alive down there, they won't be for long. Holloway nodded slowly, his gaze fixed on the tortured planet below. Mathematics, physics, the cold, hard laws of the universe that said this mission was pointless, that they had arrived too late, that whatever small voice had called out into the darkness had already been silenced by the brutal arithmetic of radiation poisoning. Sir Jackson's voice carried new urgency. I'm picking up multiple warp signatures approaching the system. Zephyrian configuration, 4 ships, including at least 1 dreadnought-class vessel. The trap was closing. Holloway had expected as much. Their approach hadn't been as stealthy as they'd hoped, and the consortium would never leave Tau Ceti 4th undefended if they suspected human interest in the system. but knowing a trap existed and being able to avoid it were two very different things. Time to intercept? 18 minutes at current approach speed. 18 minutes. Enough time to launch a shuttle, maybe reach the surface, but certainly not enough time to conduct any kind of meaningful search and rescue operation. The smart play, the logical play, would be to turn around now before the Zephyrian ships reached weapons range and live to fight another day. But logic had never been humanity's strongest suit. Torres, prep a shuttle for immediate launch, full environmental protection, maximum radiation shielding, medical supplies for emergency stabilization of a pediatric patient. Sir, the risk factors. Commander, Holloway's voice cut through her objections like a blade. That child called for help. They used emergency protocols that should have brought a dozen rescue ships running. Instead, they got orbital bombardment and a universe that turned its back on their suffering. He turned from the viewport, his eyes blazing with something that might have been fury or might have been hope. We're not the universe. We're not the consortium. We're human. And when someone calls for help, we answer. Torres stared at him for a long moment, then nodded. Aye, sir. Prepping shuttle bay for emergency launch. As the bridge crew moved to execute his orders, Holloway allowed himself one moment of doubt, one moment to consider the mathematics of the situation, the strategic implications, the very real possibility that they were about to sacrifice his ship and crew for someone who was already dead. Then he remembered the sound of that small voice crying into the void, and doubt became irrelevant. Captain, Jackson called from his station. I'm detecting a communication attempt from the approaching Zephyrian force. They're requesting we heave to and prepare to be boarded. Holloway smiled, and it was not a pleasant expression. Send a reply, Lieutenant. Standard diplomatic protocols. What should I tell them, sir? The captain's smile widened, becoming something that would have made a predator step back in recognition of a larger threat. Tell them to go to hell, and remind them that this system is under the protection of the Terran Colonial Navy. He paused. And Lieutenant, make sure they understand that we take our protection duties very seriously. In the medical bay of the Zephyrian cleansing vessel Purification, the child known as ZX stirred in her stasis pod, consciousness flickering like a candle in a hurricane. Through the fog of pain medications and radiation sickness, through the haze of injuries that should have killed her days ago, she felt something that made her broken heart skip with desperate hope. Someone was coming. The quantum resonance patterns in her nervous system, the same natural ability that had allowed her species to communicate across interstellar distances before they had developed technology, detected the approaching human ship like a beacon in the darkness. Not the cold, crystalline consciousness signatures of the Zephyrians who had murdered her family, not the harsh, geometric thought patterns of the other consortium species. Something warm, something that blazed with emotional intensity rather than cold logic, something that felt like rescue. Please, she whispered into the quantum foam, her thoughts rippling across subspace toward the approaching humans. Please find me. I don't want to die alone. On the bridge of the cleansing vessel, Wing Commander Velthar felt his carapace prickle with alarm as his ship's quantum monitoring systems detected the child's transmission. She was communicating again, reaching out toward the human vessel with increasing strength as her natural abilities fed off her desperation. Medical bay, he commanded through the ship's communication system. Increase sedation protocols. Full suppression. Sir, came the reply from medical technician Hetherin. The subject is already at maximum safe dosage. Any increase would risk permanent neural damage or death. Velthar stared at the tactical display, watching the human cruiser's approach vector. 18 minutes until Admiral Kareth Loss arrived with the forces necessary to eliminate the human threat. 18 minutes to maintain the fiction that Tau Ceti Athorth had been completely cleansed, that no survivors remained to complicate the consortium's moral authority. 18 minutes to decide whether to murder a child to protect his career. Sir, his tactical officer reported, the human vessel has launched a shuttle. Surface approach trajectory. The humans were actually doing it. They were actually risking their lives to search for a survivor they had no proof even existed. Velthar felt something that might have been admiration flicker through his consciousness before being suppressed by cold tactical necessity. Target the shuttle with all available weapons. Prepare to fire on my command. Sir, the shuttle appears to be on a rescue mission. Firing on a medical evacuation craft would be a violation of... The shuttle is a military vessel conducting hostile operations in consortium space. Velthar snapped, his harmonics carrying overtones of absolute authority. Fire when they enter the atmosphere. But even as he gave the order, even as his weapons systems began targeting the fragile human shuttle, Velthar found himself thinking about the child in his medical bay, about the moment his recovery teams had found her, half dead but still fighting, still calling for help with her last reserves of strength, about the look in her eyes when she'd seen his face. Not relief, but terror at the sight of the same species that had murdered everyone she'd ever loved. He was consortium. He was civilized. He was part of the great galactic community that brought order and progress to the barbaric frontier worlds. So why did he feel like the monster in this story? The shuttle Mercy dropped through Tau Ceti 4th atmosphere like a falling star, its heat shields glowing cherry red as it fought the planet's gravity and the roiling atmospheric disturbances caused by the recent bombardment. At the controls, Chief Petty Officer Rodriguez fought to keep their descent stable while emergency radiation warnings filled the cockpit with urgent chimes. "Radiation levels are off the charts," called out Corman Willis from the passenger compartment, where he was checking medical supplies for the third time. "Even with full shielding, we've got maybe 4 hours before exposure becomes lethal." "Then we better work fast," replied Dr. Sarah Kim, the ship's chief medical officer, as she reviewed pediatric emergency protocols on her tablet. "Any idea what species we're looking for?" "Negative," Rodriguez replied, wrestling with the controls as another atmospheric shear tried to tear their shuttle apart. "Could be anything." The settlements on Tau Ceti 4th were mixed species colonies. Refugees from a dozen different wars. Dr. Kim nodded, her medical training already running through the implications. Different species meant different physiologies, different responses to radiation, different treatment protocols. She would have to be ready for anything. "Contact," Rodriguez called out. "I've got a weak signal. Bearing 275 Mark 18. Looks like it's coming from underground." Through the shuttle's reinforced viewport, the surface of Tau Ceti 4 spread out below them like a landscape from Nightmare. Where cities had once stood, geometric patterns of fused glass caught the light of the system's dying star. Where forests had grown, fields of crystallized ash stretched to the horizon. Nothing moved. Nothing lived. The planet had been transformed into a monument to the thoroughness of consortium justice. But somewhere in that wasteland, someone was still calling for help. "There," Dr. Kim pointed toward a cluster of ruins that might once have been a residential district. "I'm seeing some kind of structure. Partially collapsed, but it looks like there might be intact space underneath." Rodriguez adjusted their approach, his hands dancing across the controls with the skill that came from 2 years of combat landings under impossible conditions. "Setting down in 30 seconds. Everyone remember, we're not just fighting the radiation. If the consortium realizes we found a survivor," he didn't need to finish the sentence. They all knew what the consortium did to witnesses, what they did to anyone who could complicate their carefully crafted narrative of human barbarism and alien civilization. The shuttle touched down with a bone-jarring impact, sending up clouds of radioactive dust that immediately began eating at their hull plating. Through the particle storm they could see the entrance to what had once been an emergency shelter, the kind of reinforced structure that frontier colonies built to protect against everything from solar flares to hostile wildlife. Everything, it turned out, except orbital bombardment. "Life signs," Corman Willis called out, his scanner painting the ruins in false color displays of heat and movement. "Weak but definite. About 20 meters down northwest direction." Dr. Kim checked her environmental suit one final time, making sure the radiation shielding was at maximum and her medical kit was secure. "Let's go save a life." They stepped out into hell. The air itself seemed to burn despite the protection of their suits. The ground beneath their feet crunched with the sound of civilization reduced to glass and ash, and through it all, carried on quantum frequencies that bypassed normal communication channels, came the sound that had brought them across hostile space to this dead world. "Please, someone help me. I'm so scared. Please don't let me die alone." Dr. Kim felt tears burning her eyes as she followed Rodriguez toward the collapsed shelter. Somewhere ahead of them, in the darkness beneath the ruins of a murdered world, A child was waiting, a child who had survived the impossible, who had called out into the void with the last of their strength, trusting that somewhere in the vast universe someone would hear, someone would care, someone would come. Behind them, in the radioactive sky above Tau Ceti 4, Zephyrian weapons systems locked onto their shuttle and prepared to fire. Above that, Admiral Karithlos' dreadnought continued its approach, carrying enough firepower to reduce the entire human task force to component atoms. But in the darkness of the collapsed shelter, as Dr. Kim's flashlight cut through the gloom and illuminated a small, broken form huddled in the corner of what had once been someone's safe place, none of that mattered. What mattered was the moment when those large alien eyes opened and saw not the crystalline face of a Zephyrian conqueror, but the concerned features of a human doctor who had crossed space itself to answer a cry for help. What mattered was the sound of a child's voice, barely above a whisper, speaking words in standard galactic that would echo through history. You came. You actually came. Dr. Kim knelt beside the injured child, her medical training taking over as she assessed wounds that should have been fatal, radiation exposure that should have killed her days ago, and injuries that spoke of a will to survive that defied every law of biology she knew. "Yes, sweetheart," she whispered, her hands already moving to stabilize the child's condition. "We came. We heard you calling, and we came." Above them, the first Zephyrian pulse cannon fired, its beam designed to vaporize the human shuttle and everyone near it. The shot went wide, deflected by atmospheric interference and the kind of luck that seemed to follow humans when they were trying to do the impossible. Above that, Captain Holloway watched the tactical display as 4 Zephyrian warships closed to weapons range. Knowing that his ship was outgunned, outnumbered, and almost certainly doomed. "Sir," Commander Torres reported, her voice steady despite the odds they faced. "Shuttle reports successful contact with the survivor. They need at least 30 minutes to stabilize her for transport." 30 minutes? Against 4 Zephyrian warships and a dreadnought that could reduce his ship to vapor with a single salvo. Holloway looked around his bridge, at the faces of men and women who had followed him across space to answer the call of a child they'd never met, and felt something that might have been pride fill his chest. "Then they'll have 30 minutes, he said quietly. "All hands, battle stations. Today we remind the universe what humanity stands for." The UES Defiance turned to face the approaching Zephyrian fleet, her weapons charging, her crew ready to die for a cause that no tactical computer could quantify and no strategic analysis could justify. They were ready to die for mercy itself. And in the radioactive hell of Tau Ceti 4's surface, Dr. Sarah Kim worked to save the life of a small alien child who had trusted that somewhere in the darkness, someone would hear her cry for help. Someone would answer. Someone would care enough to risk everything for the life of a single innocent. The battle for the soul of the galaxy was about to begin. Admiral Karithlos stood in the command center of the Eternal Silence, watching the tactical display with growing disbelief. The human cruiser Defiance had positioned itself between her approaching fleet and the planet's surface, its weapons systems charging with the desperate determination of a creature prepared to die fighting. It made no tactical sense. Holloway was outnumbered 4-1, outgunned by an order of magnitude and fighting to protect what? A dead world? A single survivor who would be more propaganda value than strategic asset. "Submander," she said, her crystalline voice carrying harmonics of confusion. "Analysis of human tactical positioning." Zephyrin interfaced with the ship's battle computers, quantum calculations flowing through his consciousness like streams of liquid light. "Admiral, their position provides minimal defensive advantage. They cannot protect the shuttle on the surface while simultaneously engaging our fleet. Their power core is operating at 87% efficiency due to battle damage from previous engagements. They have limited ammunition reserves and no possibility of reinforcement, so they are committing suicide." "That would appear to be the logical conclusion, Admiral." Karithlos studied the display, her ancient consciousness trying to process the impossible calculus of human decision-making. In her 3 centuries of existence, she had fought countless battles against countless species. She understood territorial instinct, resource competition, the drive for genetic propagation that motivated most biological entities. But this was different. The humans weren't fighting for territory or resources or even survival. They were fighting for something that existed only in their own minds, a concept they called mercy that had no tactical value and provided no strategic advantage. They were about to die for an idea. Signal from Wing Commander Velthar Zethrin reported. He requests immediate clarification of rules of engagement. Akirathlos allowed herself a moment of bitter amusement. Velthar was young, ambitious, and terrified that his operational failure would destroy his career. He wanted clear orders, simple directives that would absolve him of responsibility for whatever happened next. But there were no simple directives for a situation like this. If they destroyed the human ship while it was conducting a rescue operation, if images of that destruction found their way to the galactic networks, the political ramifications could unravel everything the consortium had built in 2 years of war. But if they allowed the humans to escape with the child, if that single survivor became living proof that the cleansing of Tau Ceti IV had been nothing more than mass murder, Admiral Zorvaxin's harmonic tone carried new urgency. The human vessel is broadcasting on all frequencies. They appear to be recording their actions. The bottom dropped out of Kala Akirathlos' carefully ordered universe. Recording. Of course, the humans weren't just conducting a rescue operation. They were documenting it, creating a permanent record of their efforts to save a single alien child while the consortium fleet prepared to kill them for it. Analysis of broadcast range and encryption. Wideband transmission, Admiral. Multiple quantum frequencies, civilian and military bands. The signal is being relayed through at least 17 communications satellites across 4 star systems. Zethrin paused. Admiral, this is being transmitted live to every major population center in human space, and several neutral systems as well. Akirathlos felt something that might have been panic flicker through her consciousness matrix. Millions of beings across the galaxy were watching this confrontation unfold in real time, watching a single human ship risk everything to save one alien child, watching the consortium fleet prepare to murder them for it. The propaganda implications were staggering. "Ma'am," her communications officer reported, "we are receiving priority transmissions from 17 different neutral governments requesting clarification of our intentions. The Altarian Republic has formally protested our apparent preparation for hostile action against a rescue vessel. The Vegan Trade Federation is threatening economic sanctions if we fire on the humans while they are conducting humanitarian operations." The trap was closing, but not around the humans. Around her. Around the consortium's carefully maintained image of civilized expansion and necessary security measures. In their eagerness to eliminate the human threat, they had walked into something far more dangerous than any military engagement. They had walked into a moment that would define how the galaxy saw them forever. "Signal Wing Commander Velthar," Akirathlos commanded, her voice carrying harmonics of cold authority. "He is to maintain position and take no action against human forces unless directly threatened. Signal all fleet elements. Weapons systems to standby mode." "Admiral," Zethrin's confusion was evident in his harmonic patterns. "The humans are still conducting operations on the surface. If they succeed in recovering the survivor, then they succeed," Akirathlos said quietly. "Because, Submander, I have just realized something that all our tactical analyses failed to consider." "Which is?" Akirathlos turned from the tactical display, her crystalline features reflecting the light of distant stars. "The humans have already won. Not this battle, not this engagement, but something far more important. They have forced us to reveal exactly who we are. And in doing so, they have shown the galaxy exactly who they are." She gestured toward the communications readouts showing the flood of incoming messages from across known space. Protests, demands for clarification, threats of economic and political consequences if the consortium fired on a rescue vessel. "We have spent 2 years convincing the galaxy that humans are violent, barbaric, a threat to civilized order. And now broadcast live across 17 star systems. They watch a single human ship risk everything to save one alien child." Her voice trailed off as the implications crystallized in her consciousness. "While we prepare to kill them for it." On the surface of Tau Ceti IV, Dr. Sarah Kim worked frantically to stabilize her young patient while Corman Willis and Chief Rodriguez prepared an emergency stretcher. The child, Zarziak, she had whispered when Dr. Kim asked her name, was in critical condition but alive. Impossibly, miraculously alive. Radiation exposure is severe but treatable, Dr. Kim reported over the comm system. Multiple fractures, internal bleeding, thermal burns. But she's stable for transport. We can have her on the shuttle in 5 minutes. Above them, the Defiance maintained her position between the Zephyrian fleet and the planet's surface, her crew ready to die to buy those 5 minutes. Captain Holloway stood on his bridge, watching the enemy warships hold their position, and allowed himself to hope that maybe, just maybe, they had accomplished something impossible. "Sir," Lieutenant Jackson reported, "I'm reading massive spikes in quantum communication traffic. It looks like, sir, this is being broadcast across half the galaxy." Holloway smiled grimly. "Good. Let the galaxy watch. Let them see what humanity was willing to risk for a single life. Let them see the difference between those who heard suffering and answered, and those who caused suffering and called it civilization." Captain Commander Torres called from the tactical station. "Shuttle is lifting off. They've got her. They've actually got her." The shuttle Mercy rose through the toxic atmosphere of Tau Ceti IV, carrying with it the most precious cargo in the universe, proof that Mercy still existed, that someone somewhere was still willing to risk everything for a stranger's life. But as the shuttle cleared the planet's atmosphere and began its approach to the Defiance, Wing Commander Velthar made a decision that would echo across space and time. Staring at the child in his medical bay, at the living evidence of his failure, he gave the order that would define his legacy forever. "All weapons, target the shuttle. Fire." The pulse cannon fired, its beam designed to vaporize the small rescue craft and everyone aboard. But Chief Rodriguez had learned to fly in the crucible of impossible wars against superior enemies, and he threw the shuttle into an evasive pattern that belonged more in poetry than physics. The shot missed by meters. Velthar's second shot missed by centimeters. His third shot did not miss at all. The shuttle Mercy died in a burst of light that illuminated the darkness between worlds, taking with it Dr. Sarah Kim Corman Willis, Chief Rodriguez, and a small alien child whose only crime had been surviving long enough to call for help. The silence that followed was not the silence of space. It was the silence of a galaxy holding its breath, watching in real time as the last hope for Mercy died in the fire of political expedience. On the bridge of the Defiance, Captain Holloway stared at the expanding debris field where his people had been moments before, and felt something die inside his chest that had nothing to do with hope and everything to do with the last restraints on human fury. "Sir?" Commander Torres' voice was barely a whisper. "Orders?" Holloway turned from the viewport, his eyes blazing with something that made his bridge crew step back in unconscious recognition of danger. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of 2 years of loss, of watching his species be systematically exterminated while the galaxy stood by and applauded. "Signal all human vessels in the sector," he said quietly. "Tell them what happened here. Tell them that a child called for help and we answered. Tell them that the consortium murdered her for the crime of surviving their genocide." His voice grew harder with each word. "And tell them that the time for mercy is over." The war was about to change in ways that no one, human or alien, could have predicted, because in destroying the shuttle Mercy and murdering the child they had come to save, the consortium had awakened something in humanity that they should have left sleeping. They had awakened the fury of a species that had learned to find strength in compassion, and had just watched compassion die. The galaxy was about to learn why, in all the long history of warfare, it was considered unwise to corner a predator and kill its young. Even when the predator had tried to save your children, too. The recordings of that day would survive long after the ships were dust and the stars themselves had grown cold. They would be studied by historians, analyzed by philosophers, and remembered by poets as the moment when the moral architecture of the galaxy shifted on its axis. In the end, it was not the death of Ziak that mattered, though her name would be spoken with reverence across 1,000 worlds. It was the moment after, when Captain James Holloway looked into the darkness where Mercy had died and decided that some things were worth becoming a monster to protect. The child had cried for mercy, and humanity had answered. Now humanity would teach the galaxy what happened to those who murdered innocence itself. The war was far from over, but it was no longer the same war.